this computer. Okay, that's recording. Okay, welcome everyone. This is week 10. We have a action-packed night tonight because we are looking at this, and I'll share the screen. We're looking at how Apple does it, and you're probably wondering, well, why do we care? You know, why do we care about this? I think in some ways there's a lot in the media written about that the Apple supply chain relationships are it's complicated, okay? And I can share another screen with you that actually illustrates this even more. And you can see, this is 2 years old, but if we look at that, we could go all the way down this article, and maybe you're asked to write an article about how Apple manages its supply. Well, how Apple manages its supply. And yes, you don't need me to tell you that Apple has done the following in its strategy to work against various suppliers like Audience, Skyhook Wireless, how Sharp was acquired by Apple's largest manufacturing partner, and how Apple has worked with Samsung and LG Display. They're back in, but they were out and they are back in. Let me just, we need to mute everyone. Someone's got some background noise. Can you turn that off, please? How do we mute everyone, Ginny? Do you know? Okay.
It's under security if you have the security.
All right. Okay, just watch out for any background noise and we'll make a note of that. Okay, let's go back to what I was sharing. Okay. Okay, back to what I was saying. Samsung and LG Display have fallen in and out. Okay, and then Apple has always tried to be ahead of the game in terms of developing new technology, and before it actually tells the world about it, it will just create lots of patents. Apple and Samsung have had many fights in the courtroom, and that went on for many, many years, and finally it was settled in 2018. Now, obviously, you can see from this article that there's a lot of information about Apple. So you're probably thinking, well, so what is special about tonight? What do you think is so special about tonight? Well, tonight I'm going to share more about the things that haven't been written about in the media, because it's based on my own conversations with suppliers in Apple's supply chain, taken from my initial China Supplier 1000 study, where I started back in 2010. It took 2.5 years to collect 1,000 interviews. And following that, and even before that, I did have a chance to talk with many suppliers and also other buyers that work on Apple, work with Apple. If we have a look at some of the parts I want to cover tonight very, very quickly, my job is not to just read out PowerPoint slides, but I want to illustrate some stories that I have been part of conversations that illustrate how Apple does it. Like from this article I just showed you, you can see that, okay, Apple can be a bully. Apple has the resources. Apple can do lots of things. It's not like they do lots of things to every supplier. But what you're going to learn tonight is some of the little minute things that Apple does that you would never know about. Even if I gave you a week to search the internet, you'll never ever find this out. So that's why I want to cover that tonight. Just to make it more interesting for you, we're going to have a Kahoot session. And just before we get into the Kahoot session, there is about 15 items of points I want to make. And there's probably about 15 or 16 Kahoot questions relating to those items. So when you see a big number on a slide, you pay attention, and because that's a point I want to make about an aspect of how Apple is managing its suppliers. Okay. Before we even talk about Apple, remember this, that in the smartphone electronic supply chain, there are many things that characterize the supply chain that you will not find in any other supply chain of a consumer product. For example, there are ginormous volumes, like Apple is over 250 million units a year. HTC was doing 30 million units a year in 2012 before its demand dropped off. There's 200, 250 components in every smartphone. Short lead times are very important. Okay, very, very short lead times. HTC was one of the first smartphone manufacturer to offer a 7-month lead time from product design to market. And because of that, they were able to attract Google Android platform and Samsung its Snapdragon chip as being the first handset to commercialize Android and the Snapdragon smart chip. And the only reason why they went to HTC and not to other competitors at the time, this is around 2008, was because HTC was offering a 7-month time between design and time to market. Multi-sourcing is very big, and multiple measures and decisions, as you learned from last week. And so as you can see, the rise and fall of smartphone manufacturers is amazing. As you can see here in the pink is HTC that you heard about last week, but notice they fell off the top 10 list back in 2012 and were never to be seen again. Contrast, at the same time, RIM was very, very big 2009, but they fell off the cliff by 2012. What actually appeared since 2012 was this Chinese manufacturer called Huawei, and you can see Huawei there gaining market share over the following 6 years. So you can see it's a very, very competitive industry. And you can also see that APAC is a large consumer market for smartphones, even larger than the Europe and emerging markets and the Americas. you can see what we learned last week of HTC. They have hundreds of components. I just mentioned 200, 250 more components in the average smartphone. And you can see that there are many different types of components that go in, from various generic components to very high sophisticated components. Okay, as you've seen in videos I've shown you in the past, that the manufacturer of smartphones is very, very complex. And this window that I'm showing you here is actually inside a clean room. So I've actually gone into a clean room, and then from that clean room, I'm looking inside another clean room. So this is even cleaner than the clean room that I am in. And those of workers there are actually putting the TFT module, the glass, on top of the smartphone. Okay, so it's, Apple's supply chain is all around the world. It's not just China, Japan, USA. They source from Europe as well. Okay, so we're going to start our Kahoot session. So what does that mean? Well, you know what Kahoot is. Put your hand up if you're ready for Kahoot. Okay, so we're going to play, and there's 16 questions. And I'll give you how Apple does it. Classic. The pin is coming.
要去卡胡特了，要去卡胡特了。1734344。
Okay, 7734340. If you have any questions, you can unmute your microphone, or anytime you can use the chat room.
我手机。哦，
我刚才把你的
Okay, are you ready for the first two questions? And then we'll get really into it. These are warm-up questions. 準備好了？準備好了？ Okay, how Apple does it. Okay, your first question. Very well. Everyone's got in before the half. Everyone got in before the 30 minutes, 30 seconds, long lead times. That is not an issue. Actually, it's short lead times is a key issue. So remember the not, N-O-N-O-T, that was a negative question. Be careful of the negative questions. Okay, let's go to one more and then we get back into it. All right, Han is on top. Well done, Han. Okay, so next. Which region has the lowest smartphone sales? You all know which has the highest, but which one has the lowest? Okay, you all got that one. Most of you, 9. Okay, remember APAC has the highest. That was very clear, I thought, but I need to make my presentation clearer. All right, let's get on to, okay, what we do at the start is select suppliers. Now that's before, last week we looked at selection of suppliers before we looked at the management of suppliers. So if you want to become a supplier of Apple, what I'm going to present over the next few slides is all about supplier selection. And I'm going to tell you a few stories as we go through. How many of you know the name of this company here? Who makes this car? You can unmute and speak out, please. I can't hear you.
So your screen still shows the Kahoot.
Okay, let me change the screen. So, okay, I got it. All right. Let's swap. Thank you. Okay, so we're back on the PowerPoint slides. And so now, this car here, who is the manufacturer of this car? What is the name of the manufacturer?
It's BYD.
BYD, exactly. One of the largest electric vehicle manufacturers in the world. It's amazing. Now, why am I talking about BYD? Why are we talking about cars and smartphones? What have they got to do with each other? Because BYD was originally a cell phone battery manufacturer. And this is going back 20 years more. They tried 3 times to become an approved supplier for a major multinational brand cell phone manufacturer. Do you know who that is? This was 20 years ago.
Is that Nokia?
It could be, but it isn't. Anyone else?
There's one called
Motorola.
Correct. They applied to Motorola 3 times. On the 3rd time, they became the approved supplier of Motorola to supply Motorola mobile phones with the battery that goes inside. And look, and 10 years later, they become a motor vehicle manufacturer, and now they're into electric motor vehicles. Amazing story for BYD. So that's what it means for suppliers from emerging economies to become a major supplier for a major brand name manufacturer around the world, because that major customer will teach the supplier the international processes of, or the international standards of manufacturing operations. And that's basically how BYD became an international manufacturer in China. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Next, now notice that's number 1. Number 2, this is a list of the 156 suppliers that Apple released more than half a decade ago, over 5 years ago, when there was questions about Apple not fully being responsible for the workers in its suppliers, when there was worker suicides and things like that. This is over a decade ago, but even up to 5 years ago. They would release their supplier list, but they did not have all of their suppliers on this list. Interesting. You can see this is the C's in their supplier list. Where is Corning? Do you know what Corning makes? Hello? What does Corning make?
Glass.
Exactly. And Apple Corning supplies the Apple iPhone glass. How come it's not in this supplier list? Well, because Corning is a raw materials supplier to Foxconn, who is on this list. So they didn't put in the raw material suppliers to this list of suppliers. In fact, Apple actually buys the glass from Corning and then it sells it to Foxconn at a profit. It's amazing that Apple does things like this, all right? It's not like there is a third party connection between Corning and Foxconn. No, Corning actually supplies Apple, then Apple delivers it to Foxconn. But interestingly, Corning is not mentioned on this list. There are critical suppliers here. How many of you have heard of Lighton? Lighton, if any of you were into music before MP3, you had what type of technology before MP3?
Walkman.
Walkman, yeah.
No, before MP3, you had, cassette tape with the Walkman. But what came after cassette tape?
CD player.
The CD.
CD, exactly. Lighton manufactured the little light that picks up the CD code when you're playing a CD player. So they make the little lights, and Lighton became a key supplier to CD manufacturers back in the 90s, early 2000. And then when the smartphone came along, they become a major supplier to all the smartphone manufacturers, especially with the LEDs, light emitting diodes, and other light technology that are in your smartphone. What about Hon High Precision Industry? Have you heard of that one before? No, but you've all heard of Foxconn, right? So this is the name of Foxconn here. I put Foxconn in there. What about Pagatron? You're going to hear about that shortly when we talk about how Apple creates more competition among its suppliers. And as you know, there are many other suppliers that supply to Apple. All right, you saw this last week. We all know that HTC is firm D or E. Which one was HTC? Yell it out, please. Hello. Which one was HTC? D or E? You
Firm
can put
E.
Firm E, correct. So which one is Apple?
D.
Apple is D, correct. Notice when I pressed my informant in Apple as to, well, sorry, can you give me a ranking out of all of these? I said, well, technology or quality, which is more important? They just said the answer was, sorry, both. They're both important. They're both critical. And they would not rank one higher than the other. They were both critical. So very, very interesting. They didn't care too much about service response, but delivery and costs were very important. Delivery, of course, on-time delivery is very critical here. Okay, so when we talk about supplier selection, Apple first focuses on technology capability that is hard to make samples, production process, and yield capability. They focus on that. They focus on technical perfection. You know, when you do engraving and you have your little engraving tool, and if I were to put this pen, and this was my engraving tool here, the mark the engraving would make would be like a channel, and it would have a circle at the bottom because of the spinning engraving tool. What Apple does was, no, we don't want that. We want a perfect square at the bottom of our engraving. Like, they were that precise in requiring the suppliers to do different things like that before they would accept them. How many of you have a Mac? Can I have a show of hands? Can you put your hands up if you got a Mac? Hello, participation here. Resize window. Let me just resize this window so I can see you all. Okay, some of you got a Mac. So can I ask you to go and touch your touch screen on your Mac? Can you do that now? Okay, about 15 years ago, Apple found a supplier that could make this special touchscreen technology, what you're touching now. No other supplier could make. And that supplier at that time could only make the yield, the production yield of making those touchscreens was only 8%. What does that mean? That means that in a production run, if we start with all the materials to make 100 units, at the other end, only 8 out of the 100 of touchscreens were of acceptable quality. The other 92 failed. Okay. Apple went to that supplier and said, okay, we're going to invest with you because you have a technology that we want for our MacBook computers. So because of that approach that Apple takes when it sees a special technology, you now have this special tactile touch when you on your Mac that is not found on any other type of notebook computer. So remember that whenever you touch your MacBook, just thank that supplier that had a 8% yield when Apple found them. If Apple didn't find them, that supplier would have been out of business. You would never have seen that technology. Ah, wow. And what's this phone at the bottom? This was Nokia's make or break phone back 5 or 6 years ago when they adopted Windows as their platform. And when Nokia went to suppliers in China, talked to suppliers, Nokia said, oh, show us your ISO 9000 capability. So they have a certificate. I got an ISO 9000. That is a standard for production process in manufacturing. And then Nokia said, okay, you can be a supplier. What Apple does is, well, I don't want to see any certificate. I want to visit your factory. I want to see you make the sample that you promise that you can make for me. What else do they do when they're selecting the suppliers? Does it get worse than that? Yes, it does. Even the generic components for the iPad. I actually did a case study on a supplier that makes inductors, and that was for the iPad. And they told me when Apple selected them as their supplier, they did several things. Number one, they visited their factory. They asked the supplier to do a run at rate, that is, do a practice run, and so they can see what the supplier can make as that component. And number three, they actually said to the supplier, oh, we want to see your management system. And the Apple managers were very, very happy to see that this supplier had a balanced scorecard system, you know, like a TDQSC in how it's managing all its internal processes. And that supplier got the nod as an official supplier. What about color? It has color experts to make sure the extract the right color is used. What does that mean? Well, I talked to another supplier that supplies the color white. What color is this? What color is this one? What color?
White.
Sarah?
White.
Yeah, this is white, right? Okay. So tell me which color. Here are two colors of black, right? So which one is blacker than the other?
A.
A.
P.
E. Same.
Same.
They're the same. And this is what happened. The supplier that supplied the white paint as this is selection here. They're not even approved yet, but in the selection process, Apple says, oh, show us, your white. And anyway, they showed Apple the white, exactly the technical specifications, the Pantene color was exactly what Apple asked for. And the response from Apple was, oh, that's not the white that we want. All right. It's just crazily specific. It is so hard to become an approved supplier of Apple, even if you do everything to their engineered spec that they give you, so you can have that chance. Even after you follow that, they might even say, oh, sorry, this black, that's not the black that we want. Okay. Amazing, amazing. And that's from the words of a supplier that I have interviewed. Wow. So that key takeaways from selection. When I talk to buyers, I actually talk about thinking about going to, after the expo, visit the factory. I already told you that. You learned that in the first 7 weeks of this unit. The supplier owner, understand the owner's intention. Remember in week 6, I told you that, you know, the last thing you should do, but it's a very important thing to do, is to find out, is the owner in love with the product that you're buying? Is the owner interested in making the best product in the world, or are they just interested in making an average product? And you're going to have problems with that supplier from this month onwards. And finally, with color, be clear with the technical specifications and with communications with the suppliers. So now it's chance for your Kahoot to get ahead. So I hope you have paid attention, and we're going to stop share and we're going to go back to our Kahoot. Jinbei Hala, are you ready for the next Kahoot session? I can't hear you. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's crank this, shall we? All right, so let's go. Hands on top, followed by Joanne, Alifa, and Joey. Joey resurfaces again. Great effort. Okay, number 3. Okay. All right. 3 people weren't paying attention, but that's okay. This is the best answer I have actually seen from the whole class in Kahoot this semester. I am so excited now. You're doing very, very well. Okay. Next question. Okay. Everyone's done well on that one. Good. Next one. Okay, response service is definitely not on their radar, but technology. Notice I had 2 delivery costs. Actually, one should be delivery and cost, the other one delivery, but it didn't matter. You all know technology is so critical. It's the long-term ability of the supplier to do very, very well. Han, you're on top, followed by Alifa, Joey, and Joanne. It is awesome. Next one. Which ranks the least important when Apple chooses a supplier? Most of you should have get this one. You should get this one very well. Okay, you know that response service, people don't care about that, but delivery costs still number 2, it's still number 3. All right. Remember, technology and quality were 1 each. Delivery and cost were 2 and 3. Okay. And then we got question 3 to 7. What number are we up to at the moment? That was 5. So we've got one more. Alifa takes the lead. Well done. Followed by Joanne and Han. Well done. Great. What is important in Apple's supplier selection? All of the above, absolutely. I think you would have got that. That's very, very, show us your process, not the ISO, the management system. 3L, the supplier I talked to told me about that they look for, and color. Yes, color is very, very important. Next, we got one more before we go to the next round. We're doing very well here. What to do to make sure your supplier is capable? Very, very, oh, 20. That is a great answer. It's a great response from the whole class. 20 saying all of the above. Remember, we talked about all these things over the last 6 weeks anyway. Visiting the factory, being clear in technical spec, understanding the owner's intention. Very, very important. Okay. So now we go back to our PowerPoint slide. And what we want to do is cover now is negotiation with, so what you do is select the suppliers and negotiation with suppliers. Well, what does Apple do in the negotiation process? Well, what is one thing that suppliers do not want to share with you? Now, remember, when it comes to negotiation, that becomes an information game. What do we mean by information game? And it's constantly ongoing, even after you've actually become an approved supplier. It can be endless negotiations from order to order to order, endless game playing when the managers that Apple have on the ground in China or in other countries are not visiting the supplier's premises. Then the supplier can do things that Apple doesn't see, or the largest customer doesn't see. So what out of this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, which one thing do you think that suppliers do not want to share with you? Now, a lot of these things I don't want to share, but what do you
still the Kahoot that's showing?
Sorry?
Yes, the
It's
Okay.
the Kahoot screen
Oh,
that's showing us.
All right, back. Okay, we're coming back. Thank you. Thank you. You got to just testing to see if your microphone's working. All right. What is one thing that suppliers do not want to share with you? Now, all of these things they may not want to share, but which do you think has, which of these do you think is very, very critical?
I guess the lower quality materials, but
Okay. In some ways,
last week we talked about tooling costs as well, so I don't know. It could be that.
Yeah, tooling costs. Yes. Well, yeah, they will share, but they may underestimate or overestimate.
Overestimate.
Then you think about all of these. What about the yield? Overestimate or underestimate?
Under.
Hands up for underestimate. Thumb up for, put your thumb up if you overestimate the yield. I want you to think about that because we're going to have a discussion about that. I want you to think, you're trying, I want you to put yourself in the mind of the supplier. How do you manipulate information to make sure that you are seen better than what you really are? Some of these are to do with direct costs, like tooling costs. We learnt about that in negotiation, that suppliers may not want to share the exact tooling costs. Are they going to under or overestimate tooling costs? They'll overestimate tooling costs. What about the yield? Under or over?
Under.
I want you to, hands up for hands up for under, thumb up for over. Okay, got some thumbs, hand up for under. We've got some hands. I want you to think about this. If you're a supplier, what are the consequences if you are underestimating or over? With costs, it's very easy. With tooling, you make them higher, right, than what they really are. All right. So you're actually building in a bit of buffer for the negotiation. But yield is a different thing. Yield is a process. Yield is a relationship between inputs and outputs. Am I right? And once you commit to a yield, what does that mean? I want you to think about that. If you overestimate the yield, if your yield is 90% when in fact it's only 80, what does that mean? What are you telling the buyer, that the only improvement you can do is another 10%? But if you're at 80%, then you're actually telling the buyer you can improve by another 25%. So I want you to think, if you're a supplier, would you over or underestimate your yield?
Underestimate.
Underestimate.
Under.
Underestimate.
Hands up for under. Thumb up for over. You're still saying, why would you say your yield is lower? If your yield,
So then it's to show that like you can, I guess,
Yeah,
improve or even
they
gain
can do
investment from
better.
that.
Like maybe set the expectation lower.
Yeah.
But in fact, that they can improve if they get it right.
I want you to think about this, because you can argue both sides. What's the argument for telling the buyer that your yield is 5% more than what it really is?
So that you're better.
It's easier to close the deal.
Yeah, you look better, number one. Okay, number two, the buyer, when it comes back to you to ask you to improve your efficiency, the buyer knows that your gap for efficiency improvement is lower. So the buyers may not squeeze you as hard. Okay. If they think you're at 80% and not 90%, then they think, oh, let's get you from 80 up to 95. Let's improve your efficiency by 20%, you know? Wow. But if you're already at 90, then they can't improve your yield by 20%. Wow. Okay. So I want you to think about this. This is information games. We're not talking to suppliers and the buyers. This is the games that suppliers do with major customers. Because the first 7 weeks of this unit, we don't get into these negotiations about yield. That's the last thing that small buyers think about when they're talking to suppliers. But when a big customer comes along like Apple, HTC, that's the first thing they talk about, because a yield for these big buyers means how much cost savings can we extract out of this supplier over the long term when we order millions and millions of units over the next 2 or 3 years. And when we want cost down 5% every 3 months. Okay. So the major customers, what they do and what small customers don't do is they focus on the yield of the supplier. All right. Tooling costs, you learned from PQI last week that, well, PQI can actually work that out because they do a backwards activity-based costing. When I talk to Apple, when I talk to suppliers, yield is a very contentious area of information game playing. So how does Apple get around that? What they do is, they told me is, we don't care about what the supplier tells us. Why? Because we control all the raw materials that the supplier orders. So we know the inputs, we know the outputs, we can calculate the yields ourselves. Whereas HTC was not able to control the inputs to the suppliers as much as Apple could. HTC relied more on the suppliers' information sharing than what Apple did. Ah, wow. I didn't think it was that complicated. It gets into really high specifics when you're talking about, see, if Apple is making 250 million iPhones a year, you can imagine the orders from one supplier that is supplying components to go into the iPhone, then the orders are in the millions every month, and they multi-source. They always have more than one supplier anyway. Okay, let's keep going. All right. This happened between iPhone 4 and iPhone 5, where they got rid of the touch sensor and suddenly it was the cover glass and touch control. And what is very important is this is a news story I want to share with you, that what Apple did, it went to LG because LG came up with this technology where they can put the cover glass straight onto this TFT LCD touch control together. And Apple went to LG and said, okay, we want to put our machines in your factory. We will own the machines, and for the next 3 years, we will control 60% of the capacity of that machine. And then after the 3 years, you can keep the machine and we will negotiate a new contract. So they did. Isn't that amazing? So my question to you is, why would Apple do that? Let me repeat. Okay. What Apple did, it went to LG and said, okay, we want to put our machines inside your factory that makes this TFT LCD touch control technology. And we want to control 60% of that capacity of the machines. And after 3 years, you get to keep the machine. Why would Apple do that? Why doesn't Apple just trust LG to do this without Apple having to buy the machine and put it in LG's factory? I want you to think about that. Remember, what I'm talking about tonight has never been, you can search all you want on the internet. You will not find stuff like this, okay? So my question to you, why would Apple do that?
They want to own the tooling and have more control.
Control over what? What are they controlling? Remember, this is new technology, right? New technology, the machines that make this. Why do they want to control this new technology?
The production, so they get more share of it, I guess.
Well, don't they? Yes, that too, but they don't want other competitors to get this technology in the same time frame. They want to delay the opportunity for other competitors to get that technology, right? If they just said to LG, oh, you own everything and we won't control what's in your factory, but can you just supply us this technology? Well, how could Apple stop LG from supplying this technology to other competitors? You with me? All right. And so Apple was making sure that it controls its capacity for this new technology by actually putting the machine in the factory, right? Number one, so it's controlling the technology and the capacity. Number two, what's another reason why Apple would contract with LG to do this? Why doesn't Apple just set up its own factory and do it itself?
Overhead cost, setup cost.
Well, we need to be more specific than this. There are different types of costs. I don't think that would have been out of its budget to do that. It's easier to set up a factory. But what's the real cost you're talking? What's the real cost that Apple wanted to avoid?
Time.
Because if Apple produced it in theirs, they'd have to pay for because it's LG's technology, right? So I guess if LG if LG produced it, they would avoid paying what's the term?
Oh, you mean
I forgot the exact term.
the patent rights? You mean, or the
Yeah,
license?
yeah, the license.
Yes and no. They could have licensed. Yeah, there's something more than that. There's a bigger cost. There's a bigger unwritten cost. I don't want you to think in terms of accountants or lawyers. There's a bigger cost than that.
R&D.
Yeah,
No, that's R&D. That's lawyers. I don't want you to think as lawyers. I want you to think in terms of a bigger cost. What's a bigger cost than accounting, than anything to do with the law? What's a bigger thing than that?
Cost of time.
Fixed cost.
Fixed
Um,
labor.
What was the big thing that? This is great. I want you to keep on thinking like this, because this is the interaction of this class is absolutely wonderful. Very excited. I want you to think. Remember last week when we started talking about the big customer? What was the big thing? Let me go back. I'll give you a hint. Let me show you. It's on this slide here. What is the big unknown cost that big brand names care about that the little buyer does not have to worry about? What was the big difference I tried to remind you about last week?
Reputation.
I think someone said it in the chat.
Reputation. Okay. So what can happen, and how many of you are studying international business? Some of you? Okay, this is an international business problem. Okay, it starts with X. Okay, the word starts with X. When an international business operates in a foreign country, it opens itself to a risk.
Xenophobia.
Xenophobic risk. Yes. Have anyone talked to you about that in international business unit? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Otherwise, I'd ask you to teach the teacher, but that's all right. Okay. Xenophobic risk is a big concern. So how does Apple avoid xenophobic risk? It makes sure it owns no factory outside of USA. The minute it owns a factory in another country at any one time, then that can become a target of protesters. It can become a target of government. It can be a target of anything in that country because it's got Apple, the big Apple logo on the factory, out the front, everything. Okay. That's one thing that Apple does to manage its xenophobic risk. So I want you to go back now. And I want you to think, all right, here is Apple. It goes to LG. It puts a machine in LG's factory, and then it tells LG, we control this machine, 60% of it for the next 3 years, and you keep the machine after 3 years. No one knows that Apple's machine is in the factory. So I've got to ask you, what's the difference between that and Apple owning the factory? Is there any difference from the point of view of manufacturing smartphones and the supply chain? Any difference? Hello?
So if something happened, Apple will not be like the center of attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they've got all of the control of owning a factory because they own the machine inside this building that doesn't have Apple brand on the outside. So therefore, their xenophobic risk is what? 0. Wow. Can they do that? Of course. They do that all the time. This is an international business strategy. And my question to those studying international business is, I wonder how much that strategy is employed by other multinationals. I don't know. All I can tell you is I know that Apple does it. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Don't you think that's interesting? I can see the wows on your faces. It's great. Okay. All right. Next. Every 3 months, costs down 5%. I spoke to a supplier of inductors, and Apple came to that supplier after 3 months and said, Apple said to the supplier, we want you to reduce your price by 5%. And most suppliers will cave in. They'll just say, okay. But this supplier said, no. Said, no, we're not reducing by 5% because we have all this accounting information to show you that these are our costs. If we reduce by 5%, we're going to go below our cost of goods sold. And also we've got evidence of investment and improvements made. And the response of Apple was, okay, let's negotiate for something in between 0 and 5%. So suppliers, yes, you can push back to a big customer, but what's important is that you have a good accounting system, that you have evidence of investment and improvements made. In other words, that you are a genuine supplier. In other words, that you are an owner that is intent on becoming bigger, better, stronger, and making better products year after year after year after year. Wow. So it's not like that Apple, because it's the largest company in the world, it can just roll over any supplier. All right. I have spoken to suppliers that have pushed back and said no. And Apple has said, okay, we accept your argument that you are investing in blah, blah, blah. So that's interesting, isn't it? All right. So it's not like it's just one way all the time. It's Apple's way and not the supplier's way. Excuse me. Back again. All right. So key takeaways from negotiation, and this reminds you of what we did in week 4, that often the larger buyers, they usually have 2 or more suppliers. So that gives them more power in negotiation, more power to actually get information than one supplier. If they're hiding from you, then you know they're hiding from you because you talk to a second supplier. Large customers can do that. Small buyers cannot do that. And what you did learn in week 4 is that you focus on non-cost items. That is, you focus on quality, you focus on delivery, you focus on checking everything before shipping. Too late to send back after it's shipped. You don't focus on cost when you're negotiating. And understand, if you're a small potato, then you may give this is as a customer, you may give the supplier an idea that your market ultimately will be USA, or it may be the EU. So maybe a large market, but for now it's just Australia. It's a small market, but in future it's going to be larger. All right. So these are some takeaways I give to buyers on that. So it's time just to remind you, there might be a Kahoot question, just note on this. So be careful. All right. Remember, this was from which week was this? This was week 3. Remember the supplier competitiveness model? And what I wanted to show you with this was that, okay, if you're a foreign entrant, a foreign customer, you're always just pushing down suppliers on costs, then they will stop sharing information with you, and they might copy, they might outsource, they might have cheaper labor, and they may not tell you. And in the end, you may not get that process improvement, which you need to have happen for that supplier to be sustainable in the long term. And that's what I do to show foreign entrants and customers That's what will happen if you just focus on costs, or the time. And we showed you that in week 3. It was a lovely semester that we've gone through in the last few months. And this was just to show you that, look, suppliers have challenges, but not all of them do the right thing, like the green response. Some of them will take the red response or the yellow response or the blue response, which has nothing to do with making self-improvement. So that's what you learned in week 3. So questions 8 to 11, we'll go back to Kahoot, and then what we'll do after 11, we'll have a short break and we'll come back to the final part of the lecture tonight. Okay, are you ready for Kahoot? And then we'll have a break. Or do you want to have a break and then a Kahoot? Kahoot now?
I think Kahoot now.
Yeah, because you'll forget after the break, won't you? I understand. Okay, so we'll do this. All right, so we'll do Kahoot now. Let's share the screen and we're going to Kahoot. Now let's see where we're at. We are at, oh, Alif has done very, very well. Han, Zal, HY, Joanne, HY, very, very good effort here. Alif has a streak with 7 correct answers in a row. Well done. Alifa, which group are you in?
G3, sir.
G3?
Afternoon
G3.
meeting.
Yeah, we talked this afternoon. G3 is very lucky to have you in their group. That is so awesome. Okay, so here we go. We're going with Kahoot. Am I sharing? Yes, we're sharing. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. Remember, we're doing 7, 8, 9. 8 to 11. What is one thing that suppliers will understate when sharing with you? Okay, now, all right. So now you're probably wondering, did Neil put in the wrong answer? No, I told you that there are arguments for both sides, and let this be a lesson. All right. I want you to think, if you start to understate yield, you communicate 2 things to the buyer. Number 1, you are communicating to the buyer that you have a lot of waste and your management or manufacturing procedures are not very efficient. Okay. You also communicate to the buyer that you can improve a lot. Therefore, whatever costs you are quoting to the buyer, that you can actually shave a lot off those costs. If you overstate the yield, then you're communicating that, well, you are better than what you really are. It's better to say that you're better. But number 2, the buyer will get the message that maybe they cannot improve in terms of cost down as much as what they could if you understate. All right. Now, the buyer will find out in time. If the buyer is multi-sourcing, they're going to compare you with another supplier. So you've got to be careful with that, okay? Because the buyer might have information and may be hard for you to understate anyway. But what I'm just saying is that with tooling cost, you're going to overstate. With fixed investment, you overstate. With yield, you will overstate. But the extent of outsourced processes, you will understate. You will understate that because you don't want to tell the buyer you're secretly outsourcing. Okay. The buyer thinks that you're manufacturing everything yourself under your control. And if you're not, the buyer won't like it. So you'll understate that. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right. Sorry, Alifa, you didn't get that one. Zoe come answer streak of 6. Zoe's doing very, very well. Next question. What is the one thing that suppliers will overstate when sharing with you? Now remember, Apple doesn't care much about this because they control. Now, wait a minute. Why did I put? Don't understand. Overstate yield. That's correct. How come there's a tick here? Doesn't make sense.
You can actually put multi answer, right?
No, because Kahoot wasn't allowing me. I've just got a basic account, so I don't know. I wasn't expecting multiple answer, but anyway, that's there's no more multiple answers, and I didn't expect that. You wouldn't overstate the extent of outsourced processes. Okay, so Zoel, you're still on. Zoel, I hope you chose yield that time. Zoel, did you choose yield? Overstate the yield? Hello?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
I chose you. Yeah.
that's good. All right. So 10. Got 2 more, then we're going to have a break. Which of these is not a key takeaway in negotiation? Is not. Remember, it's a negative question. Okay, now what's happening here? There's only 11 participate. Please do not.
Connection issues.
Pardon?
There's connection issues on all our sides.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Anyway, we're nearly at our break. So does that mean there's 10 that cannot connect? Did everyone unable to get into Kahoot then?
The page is still open, but it won't let us, key in the answer. Basically, it shows connection issues.
Oh, okay. Shall we wait? Shall we have a break and come back, or what?
It's up to you. Now it's working though. Once the timer countdown, it's working for me at least.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, but that's half the class if you can't participate. Okay. Focus on cost item is not a key takeaway in negotiation, but 9 of you, I'm glad that most of you got that right. Okay. So that means this. Okay. Scoreboard. Zoel, you're in there. Last question, then we have a break. What are the key competitive pressures for foreign entrants? This is the competitive pressures by foreign entrants, all right? This is the pressures that foreign entrants put on suppliers. So just want to be clear on that. So be careful, all right? Foreign entrants, pressures they put on suppliers. Remember, there's foreign entrants, there's foreign customers. We're not talking about all of them, okay? All right? These 3, margins, contracts, and monitoring are... Yeah, that's correct. All right. Competitive pressures for foreign entrants. So you notice, let me just have a look at the PowerPoint slide. All right, we're going to have a break now. But I just want to show you, stop share. Foreign entrants, not foreign customers. So you share the screen. It was a trick question. And I'll just show you what I mean. All right. Foreign entrants, the pressures they put on is training and product development. Foreign customers put on margins, monitoring, and contracts. Okay, so that was a trick question. So we just stop sharing. Look, let's have a break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 8:23. Okay. And remember, we have 11, I think we have 5 more Kahoot questions to go. And that's sort of brings us to the end of the presenting on how Apple does it. Just want to remind you that the ideas I'm sharing with you tonight, I'm pretty sure most of you will not be able to find evidence of this online. Most of this came from my direct interviews with suppliers of Apple and actually informants that I have within Apple. So let's have a break. I'll see you at 8:23. Okay. Record, and then we're going to share the screen. And just for your information, the result we're up to with Kahoot, we have Zol followed by Alifa, Han, Joey, and Yi Xiang. Well done, everyone. Doing very, very well. And let's go to share the other screen. Let's have a look. Share the screen. And let's get on with it, shall we? All right. So remember, only 5 questions to go. Management of suppliers. So now we're after selecting suppliers, we're going to manage them. And so what you knew from last week was, well, HTC focuses a lot on quality, followed by cost, then delivery, whereas Apple focused more on technology, and then a combination of quality and delivery. Cost came later, but it's very interesting that Apple just focused on technology all the time, and that was an amazing thing on that. But I want you to have a look at this. What do you see here? What is this? What is this, please?
The breakdown of all the components in an iPhone.
So someone says iPhone. Anyone else?
Or a smartphone in general.
Or smartphone in general. Anything else?
The main board, the circuit and stuff.
Yeah.
The motherboard.
Is this a real iPhone?
Yes. Yes.
Is this a real iPhone?
No, it's not.
Kinda sounds, kinda looks off.
Not really. On top, it says damn similar to iPhone. So
I don't think it looks like the iPhone.
Did you know? Actually, I'm going to show you something. Just have a look at my video. I just want to show you. I should take you down there on the weekend. But over there, in the distance, about 2 kilometers in the distance, there is a street of shops we call Shamshui Po. And I can go into that shop tomorrow and get a copy iPhone. Okay. Well, I have bought them in the past. I used to take them into the classroom and throw them around, but I could get one for a couple of $100 Hong Kong dollars, maybe less than 1,000 Hong Kong dollars, a copy iPhone. And this is a copy iPhone that was when the first iPhone came out. Then those manufacturers came along and they said, "Oh, we can make a copy of that," and they changed a lot of things. Instead of screwing the LCD panel to the main board, they actually directly soldered it. So you could drop it and then that solder can break connection and suddenly you got no phone that works. They used a lot of MediaTek stuff. So that's a Taiwanese company that makes a lot of generic branded chips and chip designs. And that's how they made the first copy iPhone. It's amazing. And that's a big business it's a legitimate business. When you go buy a copy, you know you're buying a copy. You know it's not the real one anyway. Okay, so it's not like they're passing it off as the real one. When they first came out, yes, they were, but that's the way it is. Yeah. So there's the iPhone teardown. That was the early stages. Apple iPhone 6. 242, but if you look at the more recent one, and this is the IX Max more later one, then you've got 443 as a bill of materials, US dollars, and they're selling that for over 1,100, 1,200 US dollars. So you can see that the margins on their iPhones are still over 50%. But generally, this is number 10, the big 10 item I want to show you now is something that Apple did back in, less than a decade ago. They realized that Foxconn was starting to get more power, and they went to Pegatron, which is another Taiwanese company that does exactly what Foxconn done, and offered them to manufacture the iPad mini when it first came out. And Pegatron and Foxconn both competed for the manufacture, but Foxconn had a cheaper price than Pegatron. So my question to you is, why did Pegatron win the contract when its price to Apple was higher than Foxconn? Why did Apple choose Pegatron? Remember, Foxconn is the major assembly manufacturer of iPhones for the whole world. Okay, Pegatron is also in the same business of assembling consumer electronics. They're both Taiwanese-owned companies. Okay, so Pegatron, Apple had to make the iPhone mini, and then it went to Foxconn and Pegatron and asked them both to compete for the supply or the assembly of the iPhone, of the iPad mini. Pegatron got the deal, even though it said it would cost it much more than Foxconn to make. Why did Pegatron get the contract with Apple? Hello? I want you to think.
Because Foxtron had too much power, and also they wanted to encourage competition.
Exactly. All right. And they wanted to show Foxconn that, okay, just because you're cheaper doesn't mean we're going to give everything to you. And that they wanted to make sure that Apple basically is controlling their supply disruption risk by expanding to another major assembly factory. And if you read the multi-sourcing literature, there are two reasons why you multi-source. One is to manage disruption risk. The other one is to create competition. And that's exactly what Apple did with Pegatron. And you notice that Pegatron was making, early on, it was making the iPhone 5, and also it was making the iPhone 4S, but not as many as what Foxconn was making. Foxconn was the dominant assembly manufacturer of all the other varieties. And that's going back 2013. Remember, just after that, they came out with the iPad. Well, actually, the iPad mini came out a little bit earlier than that, yes. Okay, so number 11, I want you to take away the following, and that is this notion of information asymmetry. What does information asymmetry mean? It means that you know something that I don't know, or I know something you don't know. In other words, there's an imbalance of knowledge about the same thing between two parties. It means you do things that I don't know, and that's information asymmetry. And so Apple, the way it manages its information asymmetry is that it can learn the yield and control its main suppliers by actually controlling the raw material suppliers of those suppliers. Like it does that with, it controls Corning, it controls a lot of the raw materials, that are sent to Foxconn or to other suppliers of components. So therefore it can actually work out the inputs, it can work out the outputs, and therefore it can actually compute its own yields of every one of its suppliers. Of course, having many suppliers, HTC can do the same, but what Apple does that HTC cannot do is Apple has much more power to control the raw material suppliers that HTC does not have. Wow. Okay, so that's an information asymmetry strategy. And that's another way of dealing with the information asymmetry strategy. Number 12 is to have factories in multiple locations, okay, but have 800 plus technical engineers. So let me explain that in the early stages of manufacturing the iPhone, one of their major buyers in China, I think it was China Unicom, they said they found one iPhone that was missing a screw, and the major customer, China Unicom, major network phone supplier in China, told Apple, hey, one of these iPhones that we're distributing has got a screw missing. Normally they had Foxconn was making iPhones on 15 lines, so each line can make several thousand iPhones a day times 15. This is going back about a decade ago, and normally they just Apple would have one manager to walk around and supervise the problems of 15 lines. The next day, when they found out from their major customer that there was a screw missing from an iPhone, immediately Apple put one manager, one senior engineer on every one of those 15 lines, just like that, bang, monitoring. That's amazing. Okay, day before, there's one manager for the whole 15 lines. Next day, 15 managers at the Foxconn factory, just like that. So they're able to do that, and that's how they get around this control problem by information asymmetry. Whenever there's a problem, they can just throw technical engineers at it on the ground and stop problems immediately as when they occur. All right. They have extensive product testing. They went through about 15,000 phones in testing the new iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. And this is going back nearly a decade ago. You know, they're twisting the phone here, they're bending the phone here, they're doing lots of things. They went through about 15,000 of just doing all of these tests. Amazing. One thing that in the industry, and this is probably not as critical, but early field failure analysis, they spend a lot of time in making sure that when phones go out for their first week of sale, then they have a whole team that is actually super sensitive to, with social media, with anything online that consumers will post, to make sure that if there's any little problem that pops up, then they're on it immediately. And that's Apple's able to do that. Small suppliers, buyers cannot do that. Okay, so let's just, there's takeaways for key management. That is, understand where your materials are coming from. Okay, and there are different things like negotiate a discount for delayed delivery. Like this is a contracting issue that we talked about in week 5. Check everything before shipping. This is what we were talking about with having a third-party inspector. Make sure, and we covered that in week 6. Don't stop communicating with the supplier and assume that things are okay. Like, this is something, regular monitoring is very important that Apple does all the time. Maybe buyers cannot do that with the supplier all the time, but it's important to keep communicating in any way that you can. And so there's other things that I tell buyers that you can learn from what Apple does. So let's go to app questions 12 to 15, shall we? Are you ready for the next to last session on Kahoot? And I'm just going to share that again, share screen. We go to Kahoot and here we go. Are you ready for the next question? Junbei Haula, is everyone connected? Are you ready? Are you awake? Are you still awake? Most of you.
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right. That's it, 12 out of 16. Which ranks the second most important when Apple orders from a supplier? Second most important. Remember, this is ordering from a supplier. Delivery and quality. Yes, remember, this is the actual screenshot. Okay, I'll share that. Notice Apple, second most important, quality here and delivery here. All right. So
Dr. Neil, the answer is just quality.
The answer you put as correct is just quality.
how come I always put it wrong? I'm so sorry. The 8 that got it wrong. Okay, we'll have to scrub that one. I meant to put delivery and quality. Sorry about that. All right, we will. Okay. Who put down quality on their own? There's 8 of you. All right, I owe you 8 a lunch. Okay, let's go to the scoreboard and let's hope the rest are correct. How does Apple create certainty in its supply chain?
Sir, we're still on the multiple measures.
If you go to, all right, okay.
Timer.
Okay, still up. Oh, disruption, Chris. Okay.
What happened here? You don't have the Kahoot on your, the Kahoot wasn't working on your computer?
Lost connection for some
Only
reason.
see the question on your screen.
You cannot see that on your Kahoot.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't see the question on ours.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's we can't redo this one, can we? Okay, let's go to the next one. All right. Okay. Okay, no one got that out of the leaders. All right. It's maybe some of the others were able to catch up as a result. All right. What does Apple want to control? Where the raw materials are coming from? Why? Why? See a trick question here. Okay. It's very important that, okay, they control the quality of raw materials. Often suppliers don't want to tell customers when they change their material supplier, especially if they're under pressure for costs. They may want to change to a cheaper material supplier. And of course, to understand the yield, the productivity of the supplier. Okay. If anything, if you're going to choose just one of these, then maybe the productivity of the supplier is equally as important as controlling the quality of the raw materials. Actually, they're all very important. Okay, but 12 of you got that right, and I'm glad I chose the right answer too. Alifa is back on top. Well, okay, number 15. How does Apple control its political environmental risk exposure? All of you should be able to get this, especially those studying international business. Is that right? Okay, most of you got that right. You're putting the machines in a factory, you're controlling xenophobic risk. Okay, xenophobia, political environment. Actually, environmental risk is in there too. So that's very, very critical. Okay, so then if something goes wrong with that factory, no one knows that that's an Apple factory. Ah, yes. Okay, so now we've got one question less, and I apologize for that mishap with that that answer. Last one, responsibility challenge. Well, it's not the last, there's one more, but very actually this is from the internet and not from what I talked about, so I want to skip over very quickly. But increasingly, because it's the largest company in the world, it's under a lot of monitoring. And the major monitoring, what happens with these large customers, and this is actually moving on from last week too, and Apple's in the same boat and really cannot do anything different than what other large brand names do that we talked about last week in their reputation risk. And that is they actually actively work with NGOs that care about the environment, that care about social responsibility, that care about human rights and labor and things like that. They actually work with them, and the NGOs have direct contact with senior management, boards of directors, etc. That's quite common, and that's something that may have come up with international business strategy. It's 10 times more critical now than a decade or more ago. The active engagement with NGOs associated with environmental and social responsibility risk. I think the big question I want to share with you here is, and there's a question on Kahoot that is about employee health and safety at Apple. They have an education academy. They have had lots of workers from their suppliers participating in that program. They also spend a lot on ergonomic design of 75 different jobs in the supply chain. And I've been to many factories myself. You've seen the videos where I've actually seen workers bending over, and I could see that, well, if the workers are doing that for 1, 2, 3 or 4 hours, then it's not going to be good for their physical well-being. And obviously ergonomic risks are a very, very important factor in the design of labor heavily concentrated assembly operations. Wow. And of course, then there's health clinics here. So, and there's environmental pollution that Apple has been, is exposed to as, wanting to be a responsible brand. So there's a lot of pressure from NGOs about their environmental exposure, social exposure, human rights exposure, many different exposures, outside of what we normally account for in the bill of materials. Okay, so final question, Kahoot, which takes us to the end of that part. Sorry, I didn't show you those slides, but let me just show you one slide just to remind you of that Kahoot question. This the Kahoot questions about this area here, about how they've worked with suppliers. They've redesigned 75 jobs in the supply chain, very, very important in managing a worker well-being in the factory. Let's go to our Kahoot question. So I want you all to do well. Last question in Kahoot. Last one. Okay, Zoel's on top. Edgar, first time I see you. What did Apple do for their health and safety? I'm glad the Kahoot is working again, at least for the final question. And most of you have got that right. Ergonomic standards. We didn't talk about that this semester, but it's very big in manufacturing. So that Edgar came in late. Joey. Zoel. Where's Zoel? Where are you? Elaine, what happened?
What happened?
Yes.
I dropped down.
Sorry. Anyway, we got. Okay, so what did we learn tonight? Let's just do next. All right. I think there's one or two errors in that Kahoot. Apologies for that. And let's show answers. We can see all of them as we went through. Okay. Difficult questions. All right, let's wrap up tonight in terms of what I was talking about with Apple. Early night tonight. Someone asked me last week a question about how do these major customers manage their IP risk? Remember, we talked about that. So I wanted to add something onto the PowerPoint slide at the end, something I didn't have a chance to put in a Kahoot. And this is something that I guess in three different ways. They do have Apple has strict rules on employees, like Apple enforces this. Like if employee shares information or if they leak information, then Apple just fire the employee. And now they're threatening a court action, especially if in the USA, under the USA law. They have strict rules on suppliers. So supplier performance typically measured in, cost, delivery, service, other criteria, but also they also emphasize the confidentiality and IP protection. Now, Apple and large buyers, they can make it an issue. Why? Because they can not only sue the supplier in a country because they have the lawyers, but number two, they can actually stop them. They can drop them as a supplier. And if they're a major customer with 50% or more of the business, then that supplier can just go bankrupt overnight. So there's a huge negative incentive for suppliers to not engage in this kind of a huge positive incentive for suppliers not to engage in this type of activity, that is share information, share tooling, do anything that works to the value loss of their major customer in terms of technology, in terms of IP protection. About second and third tier suppliers, that's another problem in the supply chain that major buyers have. And Apple is able to do that because they're larger. They actually have, the 800 technicians on the ground in China and other countries too, that will visit all of their suppliers from time to time. And one contact told me that even in China, where within 24 hours, we can visit any supplier that we have in our ecosystem, like in less than 24 hours. Something problem today, tomorrow we can be at the supplier's factory, inspecting, controlling, limiting any damage, checking what's going wrong if there's anything going wrong. So this, I think one of you last week asked me, well, how do these large customers protect their IP risk? For the most part, it's really, they protect it through physical protection and a combination of legal protection, which is in part associated with their business risk protection. That is, because I'm a large customer, if I don't give you any more business, then that is a huge disincentive for you to do the wrong thing by me. And here's a snippet from 2018 where Apple caught 29 leakers, 12 arrested. This was in USA, of its own company, of employees in the USA, leaking information about new products and things like that. So there you have it. Takeaways for the average buyer. I mean, think about supply capability, the owner, who is the owner, color. You'll never ever forget that. Like there's white and also there's white, there's black and there's also black. And it's amazing when a supplier told me that they had exactly the same white, but it wasn't the white that Apple wanted. Negotiation, seek out alternatives. That is multi-source, focus on non-cost items, understand if you're a small potato, then you talk about a larger long-term picture of going into a larger market. On the management side, you're focusing on the quality and you're focusing on understanding your third-party auditor that goes in and works with the supplier. And under the management, always focusing on the risk associated with having too fewer suppliers or the coordination costs of having too many suppliers. What we learned from last week with some of the work interviews I did with the brand name manufacturers in apparel was the big trend over the last 5 years was for them to have fewer and fewer suppliers. In other words, consolidation. And team up with reputable non-profit associations who can help prioritize various action items. And the big brand name customers are doing that. They're actively working with NGOs. The last thing they want to do is an NGO knocking on the door when there's a problem. They want to talk to NGOs before problems occur. And that forces a lot of the brand names in just ring fencing what I've been talking about last week and this week, because the brand names, what do they care about the most? What's most important? Reputation, okay? The reputation risk. And so the last thing they want to do is a problem knocking on their door that is associated with social, political, xenophobic, environmental, human rights, any of these issues that not directly related to manufacturing the product, but they're associated with choices that you make with the suppliers you work with and the employees that they hire and the location of factories, the countries that you're in, and whether they are complying with various environmental, social, human rights standards of that country. So, these are all things that the brand names or the large customers, they're basically actively working with NGOs. Mr. NGO, Mrs. NGO, tell us, what do we need to focus on? What's on your radar? What do we need to do better? Can you go and inspect our operations in these developing countries and tell us how we can do better? That's what they're doing. All right. But the small buyer, what you learned in the first 7 weeks of this unit was, well, the small buyers, they don't have time to do that, nor do they care anyway. Why would you care? Because you don't have reputation risk at stake. Your job is to actually get the cheapest product to market so you can make a margin and sell it for higher than what you buy it from the supplier from. So that was in the last 2 weeks, we've had a quick run through in what large buyers do. And I think, I'll just share with you that the most important thing again is this slide here, that reputation drives just about everything that a major buyer does. And for those studying international business, that's a big thing that drives what multinationals do, and how for multinationals, their exposure in different countries is critical. Like, in international business, you're learning that another unit. International business talks about not just the supply chain, but talks more about the sales channel that you have in other countries. International marketing, same way. And I would expect that in these other units, international business, international marketing, that your teachers will be talking about reputation risk. This is not just a supply chain problem. It's a problem downstream. So you may not own factories in China, but if you're selling in China, then you still need to be very, very careful what you're selling and how you're selling. Okay. So that's the big takeaway from the last 2 weeks. Next week, what we're going to, let me just stop for a moment. I just, 2 last things to do before we go. I just want to have some 5 minutes for Q&A, question and answer. We're going to do the feedback. And then finally, I just want to present what we're going to do next week. Okay, so any questions that you have about tonight, next, or last week, or any part of this semester? You're allowed to talk. Okay, no questions on that. All right. Let me just stop sharing that for a moment. Okay. Okay, next part. I'll just share the screen. I just want to share that we reviewed some of the videos during the week. We just want to double check that, make corrections in some of your participation. Okay, now, just want to remind you, and I posted this during the week, that your best 9 out of 12 will be counted. So it's okay that you missed a couple of weeks, or you didn't do well, or maybe I wasn't teaching very well and you fell asleep or something like that. So we don't need to count every one of those 12 weeks. Okay, we just count 9 out of your best 9 out of 12. Okay, in terms of the quiz, that was the half. Remember, it's out of 30, so you got half out of the 15 for the quiz. Just to let you know where you're up to in terms of getting feedback on your participation. And if you've got any questions on that, you can please email me and we can address any concerns that you have. Okay. Let me just stop sharing that for a moment. Okay, next point is next week, and I want to talk about your projects. Can I talk about that for 2 minutes? No comment? Does that mean no?
Go for it.
Okay.
Yes, please.
All right. Number one, any one of you, any group, you email me, you want to meet with me about your project, the answer is always yes. And the answer is we'll try and meet with you as soon as possible. Okay. So don't hesitate. If you want to see me twice a week, that's fine. And I think I'm seeing 2 groups on Thursday afternoon. If you want to, and for 1 or 2 of them, it may be the second time this week. That's fine. Don't feel that this is not a game I want to play with you where you have to try and guess how to score well. I just want all of you to do your best, and because you all chose your topic, so I want you to feel empowered that, okay, is there some way that Neil can help you explore that project topic that you chose in a way that allows you to provide the best way of presenting it within 10 pages. Because if I allowed you to do 25 pages, then I think that's easy. You don't need my help. But you've got 10 pages to make a good impact. And I think the big guidance I've been given to most groups recently is really focus on setting up the tables. Okay. And getting those tables ready, and then thinking about writing afterwards. Once you get the table set up and the right rows, the right comparison that you want to do, then it's very much easier to do the writing for the tables. So with that in mind, I would like to propose that next week, and this, my job is not to create extra work for you because it's not in the unit guide. That is, I would like each group to briefly, you can just share where you're up to in terms of getting 1 or 2 of the tables together. Okay. And then I can give you feedback. Okay. So if your group, you haven't got it together and you don't have time by next week, that's fine. Okay. Don't feel that next week is going to be graded. But what next week is an opportunity for you to get feedback from me. Okay. And you might get ideas from how others are presenting theirs. Now, you're not in direct competition because most of you're doing different topics. You're not doing the same topic. So it's not like multi-sourcing where I'm comparing your yield against someone else's yield. Okay. There are different ways of presenting every one of your projects. So they're special. So what do you think of that idea for next week?
Sounds good.
And 2 things. And then, because some of you started to ask me, so how do we do the presentation? Well, 2 things. Number 1 is basically you'll be presenting the tables, because basically your presentation is the text that goes with the tables, and your tables become the PowerPoint, and then you're presenting, aren't you? Right? And then you do the Zoom recording of you presenting your PowerPoint, and then the Zoom records your video, and then you have 4 or 5 of you presenting, and you stay within that 15 minutes. And maybe when you're recording that presentation, then maybe you make a mistake for 30 seconds and you think, oh, either do it again or let's just keep recording. And then in the end, you put the recording into a video editor and you cut out that 30 seconds. So you can do lots of things with your video. You can post-edit, post-produce to make it even better than what it would be if you were live. So keep that in mind about what you do. At a minimum, just use the Zoom platform to record your video, that is you talking, like I'm talking now, and that's recorded next to your PowerPoint as you're presenting as a group. Any questions on the presentation? Elaine is smiling, so happy about that.
I was thinking to suggest to Dan and Abby that I will probably just do a because anyway we're gonna use the PowerPoint slides, so why don't we just record it on the PowerPoint slides?
Can you do that?
We can. I was thinking of that rather than using Zoom initially.
Oh,
so.
you can do that. What platform are you going to use to record on PowerPoint slides? Adobe.
The PowerPoint itself.
Oh, I use Adobe Presenter with my PowerPoint slide, and then that records your video.
Yeah, the video will be at
next
the corner,
to the PowerPoint
like at the
slide.
bottom.
Oh, I didn't know that PowerPoint did that without
PowerPoint has that as well.
an internal application.
Or do you prefer like more lively kind?
Let me.
Like
yeah, that's a good question. Okay, just very quickly. I know I'm mindful of time, so just there's my PowerPoint, and if I click on Adobe Presenter, which is a paid platform, and I record, that will start recording me. That will start recording me as a video, what this is picking up here, and it will put it next to the PowerPoint slide. And then I can post edit. I can post edit that. It's amazingly powerful, but that costs money, and most of you don't have access to that. Let's just have a look. Both, and webcam busy not function. Okay. Let me just cancel. Okay. All right, stop there. Good question. Elaine, I think, yes, you can if it's as good as Zoom recording, is it? Like your...
It's basically, I think, quite similar to the Adobe ones. So we will have our slides, and then the video will be at the corner.
How big? Yeah, as long as your video is large enough. I need to be able to see your expressions when you show how excited you are on something. Oh, did you? So, for example, remember you saw my videos when I answer your student questions. Did any of you see that?
Not that big.
No one?
Not that big in terms of the video size. Smaller.
But I'm just saying that's what. Let me just wait a minute. Share screen. Share. That's what Adobe Presenter gives you. It gives you something like this here. Okay.
There's another option of using Panopto.
Yeah, you can use.
We had to use it last semester.
Yes, you can use Panopto. But what you need to deliver to me is a .mp4 file. Okay.
Yeah, you can convert it as well, so it shouldn't be an issue.
But you need to do that, and you need to send me a .mp4 file, and so you'll need to double test that it works in MP4 before sending it to me. Okay.
All right. Sure.
So just be careful about that. If you've done that before, then that's fine. I think last semester in the fintech unit, I think there's one out of one of the groups that they had it in the wrong format, and so we had to contact that group, and they got it. They had to go and reconvert it and give it to us back to what original format that we wanted. So, yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that? Yeah. If you don't know anything else, just use Zoom. Okay. I prefer if you all use Zoom, because Zoom creates a recording with minimal bandwidth. And if any of you have got bandwidth trouble, especially if there's a group of 5 of you, you've got to make sure that all of your internet connection is working properly, so you can present together in a coherent fashion and be recorded. Then Zoom works pretty well for that. Okay. But if you have had success in using Panopto as a group from home, then go ahead and do that. Okay. All right. Any other questions on that? Okay. So that's on the technical side. So finalizing again, next week, I will... I'm not going to waste your time with additional information about what Apple does, but I will briefly show. I'm going to, there's 2 things. Number one, I'd like all of you to show show the table that you've put together, or a draft table, and what you plan to do in terms of your comparison, or, what big insight are you going to show with your project? Okay. Okay, so it's a chance. It's voluntary. You're not going to be graded on it, but it's an opportunity to get feedback from me. Okay. So then you can just sharpen it a little bit in this way or that way.
Yeah, I think he's stuck.
Is it me or is it Frodo?
Yeah, you're stuck. You were stuck for everyone. So we didn't hear anything after draft table.
Yeah.
I'll be back.
Back.
It must be my connection. It's the Hong Kong problem, not my problem. Sorry about that. Some ship ran over one of the cables between Hong Kong and Malaysia or something. Okay. Next week, all right, so you all, I'll ask every group. There's 8 groups, is that right? How many groups have we got? 8? Just by the way, you all have access to this. This is where your 8 groups are at, 8, 7, that's right. You'll notice that in the far right-hand side, I have started to give you a traffic light to just show you where you're up to. Green means I think you're in good progress, and I just put in a little bit of notes as we go. So this is more as encouragement, not as a discouragement, and remember, any one of you can ask for a meeting with me, and I'll be happy to open it up. Okay. Tomorrow afternoon, Thursday afternoon, no problem. Okay. Or next week. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, we may have time next week. We'll see how we go with all your group presentation. But the last but not least, in the last week, I'm going to present to you I'm going to give you a presentation of the different research that I've been doing. Not in terms of, what would you call it? Not more of an overview, okay, of the research that I've been doing on supply chains, to show how, okay, all of this semester, we've been focusing a lot on case study work, stuff I've learned from interviews, but part of next week or week after, I'll show you some of the research I've been doing where we start to try to empirically analyze some of these issues that we've been talking about this semester. And there's a paper that we just submitted to a major journal in USA last week. And that paper was just about multi-sourcing on its own. There's another project I'm working on where we're looking at data from HTC and understanding, well, which parts of the scorecard factor into whether a supplier gets a higher or a lower order. Is it delivery? Is it cost? Remember I showed you what's number 1, 2, 3, 4, delivery, cost, quality, technology. Remember that, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 ranking. Well, what we do in this paper is we actually test whether that ranking is true for whether a supplier, if they do better on delivery, do they get a higher order, or do they have to do better on cost to get a higher order? And so the empirical data shows some interesting results that are different from what the interview data tells me. So that's very interesting. And then there's another project where I'm looking at how suppliers align themselves with their major customers and when they should and when they shouldn't do that. So I'll talk about that next week after we go through the presentations, each one of those groups next week. If you present your draft table, all right? I don't expect you have the final table, but present your draft table, 1 or 2 or 3 tables, or you may want to show your first wow diagram for your first page where you wow the audience and wow the reader's attention. Okay, right, for now, can I ask for your normal feedback that you normally do, and appreciate your feedback in any way? And that is through the feedback system. Can I ask you to make some comment in either 1, 2, or the 3rd or 4th column? What was the big idea that you came away with tonight after talking about Apple and what Apple has done? Remember, a lot of the stuff I talked about tonight was through my direct contact with suppliers and direct contact with a friend that works in Apple China. So I just want to thank you for tonight. And if you can just spend 3 minutes, if you can put some ideas in here. And if there's enough questions, then I can make a video that answers questions from last week and this week. I think that would be a good idea to do that. Just another tip for presenting. I think I told some of you earlier, when I was asked to give I remember the Indian lady that came on in week 2 and talked about sourcing from India, Megla. Do you remember her?
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was on her podcast, the video podcast. So there was me and then her, and we're together on the video. Okay. So the arrangement was, Neil, before Thursday we do the interview. On Tuesday, my team will check. Not for the podcast, but I think, I had to do a live video for Global Sourcing Conference. And the day before, they said, you need to check in at, I think, 10:30 or 11:30 in the morning by video. And we're going to check the video and we're going to check the audio. And the big thing they told me was, it's very important that the top of your head is at the top of your video. Okay, so you don't have the video like this. okay, where my chin is at the bottom of the video. It's always better. This is what they taught me. This is marketing, guys. This is not supply chain management, okay? This is you always put the top of the head near the top of the video. So it's better to have shoulders with your head in the video, but not, if you're down like this, it looks like I'm drowning, okay? It looks like I'm drowning here, right? So this is marketing. This is what they taught me when I was getting ready for the global sources video. So if you notice that my head's being cut off a little bit, then that's marketing, okay? So don't worry about that, all right? Appreciate your feedback in the group, and we finish early tonight too, if that's okay.
No complaints at all.
No complaints. Yeah, please. I don't want to compete with other units. All right. I know I've gone long many times, so I think we've earned a early break tonight and next week and the last week. So we will do that. Okay. I noticed many of you putting in comments. So I appreciate that. Any questions you have? Any questions on your mind? Edgar, how did you feel tonight?
I'm just a bit tired, so yeah.
That's all right.
Not 100%, but still functional.
All right. Okay. Well, all right. That, from next week and the last week, I'm here to serve you, to help you finish your project. I think your biggest challenge is to get it, putting a table together and making sure it best represents the insights that you want to bring out of your report. So here to help, happy to help. And if any of you, if you want, as a group, you want to send me the table and say, oh, can we meet to discuss the table? Happy to do that. Okay. Can I ask all of you to at least put a question in that on your mind, or something that the big idea that you got tonight? Or maybe you knew everything I taught you tonight. Maybe you read about it before. Then let me know. Maybe I'm not telling you anything new. I don't know. There's one question. Why does Apple rank technology as most important? And I think for Apple, technology is the way in which they compete, because they're never competing on cost. They're always competing on a margin, and they're always focusing on design and the customer experience. And they feel that technology is the fastest road to that every day of their existence. Anyone else with your comments? Like, there's only 7 comments here, 7 rows. Can I ask you to just fill in something, some feedback? Of course, next week and onwards, I think Monash is going to ask for your feedback too, because they want to know, should we get O'Connor to teach this next year? Maybe he's getting too old for this sort of thing. Maybe we need to replace him with some young, energetic person that can bring new life into this topic or something like that. So please do participate in that, because it's very important for the MIB program that they get as much feedback as possible from the students. So we make the MIB program better for everyone. Just on a side note, separate from this, and then I'll leave you because it's going to be 9:30 and I want to finish this at 9:30. Separate from this, many of you joined the MIB for the purpose that it's going to take you to a new level in terms of understanding, knowledge. Many of you joined MIB because it will open up career opportunities. It will help improve your CV for job search, things like that. I'm happy to speak with any one of you about your career challenges or even your personal development challenges that stand in the way of getting the job that you want, or maybe getting a job in the country that you want to work. There may be, through conversation with me, you may think through your problem in a different way. So if you want to contact me and talk about that, I'm happy to help. That's separate from this unit. So happy to help in any way I can. Okay, because what's important at the end of the day is not just you get a piece of paper from Monash, but you actually get to achieve what you want. You get that job, you get that promotion, or you get to move to you're not in supply chain, you want to move in the supply chain, or you're not in a multinational, you want to get a job in a multinational. How do you do that? There's always unknowns that I might be able to help you with. So just contact me separately if you need to have a conversation, confidential conversation about that. Happy to help. Okay, it's 9:31, so therefore I am officially going to declare this class closed, and you may all go back to your busy lives. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you so much, sir.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Sir.